We may never unlock all the secrets, but the greatest thing we can gain from both science and cinema is the search for meaning.
Culture is science, science is culture. I think that's really true. I think that those are two things that are actually really, really hard to separate. And when we take the time to look really closely at that distinction, I think that there's a lot of room for really rich, creative work and experimentation.
Thoughts on the Science New Wave movement and the manifesto at large, there's a lot of things that I'm really excited about. The idea of experimentation, both in film and science, I think is very important, especially when we're interacting with different cultures around the world. There's different ways that we think, and being able to explore new ways of storytelling really kind of cuts at that nexus of bringing together different people around the world.
I guess I was particularly drawn to the manifesto. Science becomes culture, structure dictates functionality, right? So, we're all messengers. Experiments become cinema, that's a particular one. That's one I'm especially drawn to. What started off as experiments become mainstream. In the same way the Who's 30, 40 years later becoming the template for it. Experiments drive everything forward. And that to me is what filmmaking is all about. Whether we choose to convey this message through a 2.5-hour sci-fi quasi-religious masterpiece or an 8-minute and 47-second video of a woman being tormented by a demon, we all just have to...
And this really speaks to trait 1 and trait 2 of the manifesto, where culture is science and science is culture, and diversity feeds the ecosystem. The reason why this is these types of experiences can radically transform people, and these changes endure throughout their lifetime. And this individualization can feed a culture and can feed inquiry.
For me, Symbiosis is all about experimentation. As a scientist, I conduct experiments daily at the bench, but filmmakers are conducting their own experiments, so I'm very curious to take a look into their own experimental approach. And of course, bringing a scientist and a filmmaker together for a week is an experiment by itself, so I'm very excited about the process of creating a film and seeing the results of this experiment.
I was always sort of taught that the sciences and the arts were two completely different entities that couldn't really coexist. And so as somebody who was really fascinated in biology and chemistry and the environment, as well as singing and dancing and filmmaking, that my identity couldn't really exist. And so to see a space and community like Science New Waves in which, folks are encouraged to explore the sciences through the audiovisual medium is really refreshing. It allows science to be shown and perceived in a different way, and not only seeing media as a way to inform folks about science, but make it entertaining and more accessible to people. I think that's what's really exciting about this community.
Recently, I've been very interested in understanding cultural and mythological interpretations of scientific phenomena. And for that reason, I now believe that art and science are sort of like sisters in some ways, both things that we need to make sense of this incredibly complex, bizarre, absurd, and amazing world that we inhabit and share with thousands of cool organisms and elements in nature.
What excites me about telling a story under the Science New Wave paradigm is the idea of being able to experiment with how a scientific story is told. So being a bit more expressive, a bit less objective perhaps, and getting at the way that a concept or an idea or a result makes you feel. So trying to tap into that emotion that's just underneath the attempt at objectivity.
And I think artists and scientists both look at things really closely to get to know them and to know them really deeply. I'm interested in the idea of small stories being a vehicle to say something larger. I am interested in process and in questions of how process unfolds in science and in art and film. I think there's often focus on the final product, but the process is really where the interesting stuff happens. I'm interested in questions of identity, who gets to do science, who gets to digest the science. And my ultimate goal is for people to experience curiosity and wonder about the natural world, especially the oceans.
Reading the Science New Wave backstory got me thinking about how combining science and art can help us engage people in the process of science. It can make science more accessible, and it can give us opportunities to tell stories that people connect with and that resonate with people, while also highlighting the beauty in science and nature.
After I read the Science New Wave manifesto, I found myself compelled to look up the dictionary definition of the word experimental, because it's a term that's so closely associated with both science and cinema. And the first one that I found was relating to scientific experiment. Number 2 is involving a radically new and innovative style. Number 3, based on untested ideas or techniques and not yet established or finalized. And number 4, based on experience as opposed to authority or conjecture. I want to hold on to these sentences because they really remind me of the importance of playfulness that's necessary for discovery in my creative process that's hopefully free from dogma and forced expectations. And heading into the Symbiosis week, I'm really curious to find out if and how this approach relates to the work of scientists as well.